Please open your Bibles to our scripture text this evening in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5. And for our text this evening, I just want to focus on one verse here in this chapter, and that is verse 13. Matthew 5, verse 13. As you know, this is part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Here's what he said. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled under the foot by men. You know, salt has been a very precious commodity since God created the world. We read about salt in the very first book in the Bible, when Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt after she ignored the angel's warning and looked back on the city of Sodom as it was being destroyed. And there was actually a time in history when salt was as valuable, or was so valuable that an ounce of salt could actually be traded equally for an ounce of gold. Many ancient countries minted their coins in hard salt crystal. And even in Jesus' day, it was very common for a soldier to receive salt as a part of his daily wages. As a matter of fact, our English word salary comes from those days when salt was given as a wage. So why is salt so valuable? Well, you and I can go to a grocery store and buy a 26-ounce container of salt for less than $1, so it doesn't have much monetary value. So where does it get its value? Well, the true value of salt is found in its many uses. For example, salt is valuable because salt is useful as a preservative. Back in Jesus' day and time, they didn't have any means of refrigeration. So families would pack their fresh cut meats and their fresh picked vegetables in salt to preserve them for many months. Likewise, professional fishermen in Jesus' day didn't have ice or freezers to store their catch of fish, and so they would pack the fish down in salt to keep them fresh until they could get them to market. Some of you all might like salt herring, like they used to have at Cypress Grill. I don't, but maybe some of you do. That is fish that has been preserved by packing it in salt. Some of you might like country ham. Country ham, you know, is very salty. It's because it's been preserved with salt. In many third world countries today, this means of preserving meat and fish and vegetables is still widely used. But it's not just limited to third world countries. Right here in our own country, many of the packaged foods that you and I buy in a grocery store are loaded with salt. You look at the nutritional information on the back of a can or on the back of a box that has processed foods stored in it, you will see it's got a high content of sodium, salt. Even diet soft drinks are loaded with sodium, and you know, salt makes us retain fluids, so you kind of wonder what's the benefit of drinking a Diet Coke or a Diet Pepsi. They're loaded with sodium. Another reason salt is valuable is because salt is useful for medicinal purposes. How many of you have ever used Epsom salt for treating a sprained or swollen ankle or some kind of a foot infection? It's very effective in using it that way. If you wear contact lenses, you no doubt use saline solution every day. What is saline solution? But salt water. When I ran track and cross country in high school, the coach used to give us a salt tablet before the race. And that salt tablet was to keep us from dehydrating, to keep us from cramping up. And salt works well to lessen the pain of bee stings. bug bites, and even poison ivy. I remember reading an article several years ago about people with various kinds of skin diseases that travel over to Israel to bathe in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has a salt content that is 100 times higher than the Atlantic Ocean. And there's something very medicinal about those salt waters of the Dead Sea. And many people go there to treat skin diseases. So salt is valuable for its medicinal purposes. And of course, salt is also valuable because it's useful for dietary purposes. I mean, let's face it, salt simply makes food taste better, doesn't it? I've tried unsalted popcorn. I've eaten unsalted potato chips and unsalted peanuts, and they just don't taste right without any salt on them. I remember years ago, Lynn and I were trying to watch our sodium intake, and we got some unsalted ketchup, and I can tell you, don't ever buy that. It's awful. It tastes awful. Everything from a slice of tomato to French fries to fried eggs tastes a whole lot better if you put a little bit of salt on it. In more recent years, I've discovered that salt also has other useful purposes. Several years ago, I was looking for a natural weed killer to use around our horse pasture. You can't use Roundup or a lot of other chemical herbicides around a horse pasture, around where you have any livestock, because it can kill them. And so I was trying to find something I could use that would naturally kill the weeds. And I was surprised to learn that one of the best natural weed killers is a blend of salt and apple cider vinegar. And it works. I've done it for about 3 years now. And if you have trouble with ants getting into your house, sprinkle salt along your doorway, and it forms a natural barrier to keep ants out. So you see, even though salt is as old as the earth itself, and it's inexpensive and in abundant supply, salt has many useful purposes in the world today. And for that reason, it is still very valuable. Now, turning our thoughts here to our text. If Jesus stood up before us this evening and said to all of us here, "You are the salt of the earth," I'm not sure we would fully appreciate or understand exactly what he means by that. But to those who lived in the first century, who heard Jesus say those words, they considered it a great compliment to be called the salt of the earth. You see, when Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth," he was saying, you are special. You are important. Your presence in the world makes the world a better place. And I want you to note that this term, salt of the earth, only applies to believers. This term is not used in reference to non-believers. It is a term that Jesus used in referring to his followers. You and I are the salt of the earth. You see, this world is under the curse of sin. And because it's under the curse of sin, this world is in a state of moral decay. As a matter of fact, for the past 6,000 plus years since Adam and Eve sinned in the Garden of Eden, this world has continued it has not gotten better, it has continued to get worse. It's in a state of moral decay. And I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but the condition of this world is going to continue to decay and rot before the return of Jesus Christ. And you know, as bad as things are in the world now, can you imagine how much worse things would be were it not for the presence of Christians in this world? We don't need to underestimate how different this world would be if we weren't here. You see, our presence as the salt of the earth has actually retarded the decaying process. to a certain degree. Otherwise, humanity might have already destroyed itself long, long ago. Our presence here has hindered Satan's work. The fact that there are Christians in this world has prevented Satan from doing everything that he would like to do. Satan would love to have every baby aborted. But the presence of Christians, the presence of the salt of the earth, has kept that from happening. Satan would love to destroy every marriage and break apart every family, but the presence of Christians, the presence of the salt of the earth, has helped preserve the godly ideal of marriage and family. Satan would love to have every law that protects the freedom of religion and the freedom of worship to be stricken from our law books. But the presence of Christians, the presence of the salt of the earth here, has prevented that from happening. Satan would love to have every town and every community in America overrun and controlled by violent gangs and hoodlums and drug dealers. But the presence of Christians, the presence of the salt of the earth, has kept that from happening. You see, the moral decay of this world would have been greatly accelerated were it not for our presence in this world. There's a lot of corruption in our government. Can you imagine how much worse that corruption would be if it weren't for the influence of Christians in the government? Every school is made better by the presence of Christian teachers, and Christian principals, and Christian coaches, and Christian students, and Christian student athletes. Every hospital is made better by the presence of Christian doctors and nurses, and Christian administrators, and even Christian custodians, and housekeepers. Every factory is made better by the presence of Christian employees and Christian supervisors. Every court of law is made better by the presence of Christian lawyers, Christian judges, Christian court reporters, and Christian court officials. Every restaurant is made better by the presence of Christian waitresses, Christian waiters and cooks. Every bank is made better by the presence of Christian tellers and Christian bank administrators and Christian bookkeepers. Every store is made better by the presence of Christian store clerks and cashiers and stock boys and store managers. You see, everything that is still decent, everything that is still righteous, everything that is still wholesome and respectable in this world can largely be attributed to the presence of God's people, the salt of the earth. The Scriptures teach us that when the Lord comes to gather His church, when the Lord comes to take His people out of this world, that the condition of this world is going to deteriorate to levels never before seen in all of history. And the Bible refers to this period as the Great Tribulation. During those days, Paul tells us in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that the restraining power of the Holy Spirit is going to be removed in those days, and that the floodgates are literally going to be opened, and the violence, the hatred, the lawlessness, the civil disobedience, the godlessness, and the perversion is going to escalate to levels that have never before been seen in the history of the world. And you know, I can't help but wonder if those people who are living in this world during the days of the Great Tribulation will not think in the back of their minds how much better things were while the Christians were still here. Now, I want us to make a turn here, and before we close this message, to draw your attention to a penetrating question that Jesus asked here in verse 13. He said, "But if the salt loses its flavor, how can it be seasoned?" In other words, if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? does salt lose its saltiness? Does that just naturally happen over a period of time? Does salt just get old and lose its saltiness? No. Salt loses its saltiness when it becomes contaminated with something other than salt. I'm going to use an object lesson here. I've got two salt shakers here in my hand. In this salt shaker, there's pure salt. This salt still has its saltiness. This salt can still be useful in fulfilling its purpose. If we had a meal afterwards, we could take that shaker of salt, and if we had something to put it on, we could sprinkle that on there and not have any worries about it. It's going to taste just like salt. It has maintained its purity. Now, this salt has lost its flavor. It has lost its savor, as the King James says. Now, why is that? Well, you see, there's more in that salt than salt. This salt has been contaminated with dirt. How does dirt get inside the salt shaker? Well, there's only one way, and that is for the lid to be left open. When the lid is left off, when the lid is left open, it allows all kinds of contaminants to come in and take away the purity of the salt. And you see, because this salt is no longer pure, because this salt has lost its savor, lost its flavor, I wouldn't put this on anything. I wouldn't put this on any meat. I wouldn't put it on any vegetable. I wouldn't put it on anything. This salt is no longer useful. As a matter of fact, all you can do with this salt is take it out behind the building, dump it out on the ground, and we can walk on it. That's what Jesus said. This salt has its flavor. This one doesn't. What's the difference? This one has been contaminated. Now, how does that relate to you and me? How do we as Christians lose our saltiness? We lose our saltiness when we leave our minds and our hearts unprotected and allow ourselves to become contaminated with the world. When we act like the world, when we talk like the world, when we think like the world, when we live like the world, we lose our spiritual effectiveness to witness to this lost and dying world. We lose our useful purpose that the Lord has intended for us, and that is to make a difference in the lives of people. Parents, have you lost your saltiness with your kids? As I mentioned this morning, do they see you act one way at church and act another way when you're at home? You guys, have you lost your saltiness with your fishing and hunting buddies or the guys that you work around every day? Do your colors change when you're around these guys? Do you swear? Do you tell dirty jokes? Do you make crude and vulgar comments about women when you're around them? Do you do things that you should not do that have hindered your witness? If you have, then don't be surprised if you've lost your saltiness with those guys. You can talk about church all you want to, but if there are other things in your life that have turned them away from Christ, it doesn't matter how much you talk about the Lord of the church. Your saltiness is gone. You ladies, have you lost your saltiness around your lady friends? You chime right in on the husband-bashing conversations. You make lewd comments about men. You use crude or vulgar language. Do you gossip about your fellow Christians? If you do, then don't be surprised if you haven't lost your saltiness. How about you young people? You know, peer pressure is very, very tough at your age. And there's a big temptation to do anything and everything just to fit in and to be popular with your peers. But just remember, if you do, young people, you may lose your Christian influence over them. You may lose your saltiness. The only way that we can remain the salt of the earth is for us to live holy and obedient lives and not allow ourselves to be contaminated and polluted by the world. When Jesus said you are the salt of the earth, he is telling us that we have a tremendous responsibility to preserve those things which are holy and righteous and good. And you stop and think about it, if we don't do it, who is going to? Nobody. The world's not concerned about those things. And so if we fall down on the job, if we lose our saltiness, then nobody's going to protect those things that are of God. It's up to us. Now right now, you and I are in the salt shaker. While we're here inside of this church building, we're not really having any impact on the world outside of this church building. And our greatest influence is going to come when we walk out of these doors for just a little bit. And when we go back to our homes, back to our neighborhoods, back to our jobs, back to our schools. And that is where the Lord can use you and me to make an impact on the lives of others. You see, on a very personal level, this means that as the salt of the earth, you and I can make an eternal difference everywhere we go and with everyone we meet, as long as we keep our saltiness. And so when we leave here tonight, let's walk out of here reminding ourselves, I am the salt of the earth, and what I do out there makes a difference. Let's never forget that.